I never thought inheriting a frozen parking lot in Vermont would teach me the most expensive lesson about reading contracts. But here I am, watching a woman in a North Face puffer jacket throw the biggest tantrum I've seen since my nephew didn't get the right birthday cake. My name is Franklin Ellis, and 6 months ago, my uncle passed away and left me a weird piece of property in Burlington, Vermont. Not a house, not a storefront, just a half-acre paved parking lot sandwiched between two residential buildings. The lot had been in our family since the 70s when my uncle bought it as an investment. For the past 15 years, he'd been leasing it to the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association for their overflow parking. The residents of their fancy townhouse complex used it because their own parking was limited. My uncle had maintained it, plowed it in winter, and collected a modest monthly check. When I inherited it, I figured I'd do the same. I'm a contractor by trade, 34 years old, and I've lived in Burlington my whole life. I run a small construction and property maintenance business with 3 trucks, including my faithful F-250 with a snow plow attachment. Vermont winters are brutal, and snow removal is half my income from November through March. When I took over the parking lot, I reviewed the lease agreement my uncle had with the HOA. It was straightforward. I provided a cleared, maintained lot. They paid me $1,200 monthly. The lease didn't specify how I had to maintain it, just that I had to keep it accessible and safe. The problem started in late October when I attended my first HOA meeting as the new property owner. They held these meetings in the community room of their main building, a renovated brick structure that probably cost more than my entire house. I showed up in my work jeans and a flannel shirt, feeling immediately out of place among the pressed khakis and designer sweaters. The HOA president introduced herself as Patricia Morton, a woman in her late 40s with that particular haircut that screams, "I want to speak to your manager," and oversized glasses that somehow made her look both sophisticated and perpetually irritated. She had a way of smiling that never reached her eyes. "You must be Franklin," she said, shaking my hand with the enthusiasm of someone touching a dead fish. "We were so sorry to hear about Robert. He was always very accommodating." "Thank you," I replied. "I'm planning to continue the arrangement exactly as it was." "Wonderful." She gestured to a seat at the folding table where about a dozen other HOA members sat with printed agendas in front of them. We were actually hoping to discuss some updates to our parking policies. I should have left right then. Instead, I sat down and listened as Patricia launched into a 40-minute presentation about community standards and aesthetic guidelines. Apparently, the HOA had recently passed new regulations about what types of vehicles could park in their designated spaces. Commercial vehicles, work trucks, trailers, RVs, and anything they deemed unsightly were now prohibited. Of course, this applies to the overflow lot as well, Patricia said, looking directly at me. We can't have our property values diminished by inappropriate vehicles. I raised my hand like I was back in school. Just to clarify, you're talking about where residents can park their vehicles. My truck wouldn't fall under that since I'm not a resident, right? Patricia's smile tightened. Your truck? Yeah, I use my plow truck to clear the lot when it snows. I park it there sometimes when I'm working on the property. Several HOA members exchanged glances. A thin man with wire-rimmed glasses named Douglas spoke up. What kind of truck? Ford F-250 with a plow attachment. Same truck my uncle used. That's a commercial vehicle, Patricia said flatly. Right, because I use it for my business. But like I said, I'm not a resident. I'm the property owner maintaining my own property. Patricia pulled out a folder and removed a document. According to our revised bylaws, any vehicle parking in HOA-designated spaces must comply with our standards. The overflow lot is designated HOA parking per our lease agreement. But I own the lot, I said, feeling my patience start to thin. The lease says I have to maintain it. How am I supposed to maintain it if I can't bring my truck there? That sounds like a you problem, Franklin. Patricia's voice had gone cold. Our community standards exist for a reason. We've worked very hard to maintain property values and aesthetic appeal. Commercial vehicles are prohibited, period. I looked around the table for support, but found only uncomfortable faces staring at their agendas. This is ridiculous. My uncle plowed that lot for 15 years with the same kind of truck. Robert was grandfathered in under the old policies, Douglas chimed in. These new regulations went into effect last month. Convenient timing, I muttered. Patricia heard me. I'm sorry you feel that way, but rules are rules. If you can't maintain the property in compliance with our standards, perhaps we need to renegotiate the lease terms. The lease doesn't say anything about what kind of vehicle I can use for maintenance. It says the lot must be maintained to HOA standards, Patricia countered. Our standards now prohibit commercial vehicles. Therefore, you must maintain it without using prohibited vehicles. The logic was circular and infuriating, but I could see I wasn't going to win this argument tonight. Fine. I'll review the lease with my lawyer and get back to you. You do that, Patricia said with that dead-eyed smile. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks. I left fuming and spent the next day reading through every line of that damned lease agreement. Patricia was technically right that the lot had to meet HOA standards, but those standards weren't defined in the original lease. My uncle had signed this thing in 2009, long before Patricia and her aesthetic police took over. I called a lawyer friend named Mike who specialized in property law. It's a gray area, Mike said after reviewing the documents. The lease predates their new bylaws, and there's no clause requiring you to comply with future policy changes. But if they want to push it, you'd probably end up in court, and that's expensive. So what do I do? You could ignore them and see if they follow through with legal action. You could try to negotiate an amendment to the lease, or you could comply and figure out another way to plow the lot. None of those options sounded good. I decided to ignore them for the moment and see what happened. Winter was coming, and I had bigger concerns than Patricia's parking crusade. The first snow came in mid-November. Nothing major, just 3 inches that fell overnight. I drove my plow truck to the lot at 6 in the morning and got to work clearing the spaces. The lot wasn't huge, but it held about 30 cars, and the layout required careful maneuvering to get all the snow pushed to the far end where my uncle had always piled it. I finished just as residents started heading out for work, and several waved thanks as they scraped ice off their windshields. I was dumping the last pile when Patricia's silver Lexus pulled into the lot. She parked, got out, and marched toward me with her phone already in hand, taking pictures. "What are you doing?" she demanded, clearing the lot. "That's my job, in a commercial vehicle." "I told you those aren't permitted here. And I told you I need this truck to do the work, unless you want to shovel 30 parking spaces by hand." Patricia's face flushed red. "Don't be smart with me. I'm documenting this violation and bringing it to the board. You're in breach of community standards. I'm maintaining my own property that you lease from me. There's no violation. We'll see what our lawyer says." She took several more photos, including close-ups of my plow and truck logo, then stormed off to her townhouse. Over the next week, I received 3 certified letters from the HOA. The first was a formal notice of violation for parking a commercial vehicle in the lot. The second was a fine for $500. The third was a warning that continued violations would result in lease termination. I called Mike again. Can they do this? The violation notice is baseless since you're the property owner. The fine is unenforceable for the same reason. The lease termination threat is more complicated. They'd have to prove you're not maintaining the property per the agreement, which you clearly are. But again, if they want to fight it, you're looking at court costs. This is insane. Welcome to HOA disputes. They're almost always insane. I decided to try reasoning with them one more time. I attended the next HOA meeting in early December and waited through 20 minutes of discussions about holiday decorations before Patricia acknowledged me. Franklin has asked to address the board, she announced. 5 minutes. I stood, taking a deep breath. Look, I understand you have rules about vehicles. I respect that. But I'm not a resident. I'm the guy who owns the lot you all park in, and I need my truck to maintain it. My uncle did this for 15 years without any problems. Can't we work out an exception for maintenance vehicles? Patricia didn't even pretend to consider it. Our policies don't allow exceptions. If we bent the rules for you, we'd have to bend them for everyone. I'm not asking you to bend rules for residents. I'm asking you to acknowledge that the property owner needs access to his own property with appropriate equipment. A woman in the back named Susan raised her hand timidly. I think Franklin has a point. How else is he supposed to plow the snow? He can hire a company that uses appropriate vehicles, Patricia said. What's an appropriate vehicle for snow plowing? I asked. A smaller truck without all that ugly commercial signage. That's not how snow plows work. You need weight and power to push heavy snow. And the signage is literally just my company name. I could cover it if that's the issue. Douglas shook his head. It's not just the signage, it's the principle. We have standards. I felt my temper rising. Your standards are going to leave you with an unplowed parking lot. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening us? I'm explaining reality. I have a business to run. I can't afford to buy a whole different truck just to plow one parking lot. And I'm not doing anything wrong by using my own vehicle on my own property. It's HOA designated parking, Patricia repeated. That makes it subject to our rules. I'm the landlord. You're the tenants. Landlords don't follow tenant rules. The room went silent. Patricia's face had gone from red to purple. We'll be discussing this with our attorney. If you continue to violate our policies, we'll take appropriate action. You do that, I said and left. The next snow came a week later, a bigger storm that dropped 8 inches overnight. I showed up at 5 in the morning with my plow truck and found a chain stretched across the entrance to the lot. Someone had locked it to 2 posts I didn't even know existed. I got out in the blowing snow and examined the setup. The chain was new, the lock expensive. This was planned. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia. It rang 6 times before she answered, sounding groggy. What? There's a chain blocking the entrance to the lot. Yes, the board voted to restrict access to authorized vehicles only. It's my property, Patricia. It's HOA designated parking, and you've been explicitly told your truck isn't permitted. If you want to maintain the lot, you'll need to use a compliant vehicle. I don't have another vehicle, and even if I did, I couldn't just swap a plow onto it. That's not how this works. Then I suggest you hire someone who can comply with our standards. Have a nice day, Franklin. She hung up. I stood in the falling snow, watching it pile up in the empty parking lot. Residents would be waking up soon, trying to get to work, and they'd find their cars buried. But Patricia had made her position clear, and I was done playing games. I took photos of the chain, the growing snow accumulation, and the empty lot. Then I drove home and made myself breakfast while I thought through my options. By 9 that morning, my phone was ringing constantly. Residents were calling, asking when I'd be clearing the lot. I gave them all the same answer. Contact your HOA president. She's blocked my access to the property. Patricia called at 9:30, her voice sharp. You need to clear this parking lot immediately. Residents can't get out. I tried to clear it at 5 this morning. You locked me out. You know exactly why that chain is there. Use a different vehicle. I don't have a different vehicle with a plow. You want me to hire someone. That'll cost about $500 per storm, and I'll need to add that to your monthly lease payment. The lease amount is fixed. Then I guess the lot doesn't get plowed. You're in breach of contract. No, I'm being prevented from fulfilling my obligations by your ridiculous policies. I'm happy to maintain the property, but you won't let me access it with the necessary equipment. That's on you, not me. We'll sue you, Patricia threatened. Go ahead. I've documented everything. See you in court. I hung up. Over the next 3 days, the situation devolved into chaos. The lot remained unplowed, and residents either had to dig their cars out themselves or leave them buried. Several called towing companies to pull their vehicles out through the deep snow. The HOA held an emergency meeting without inviting me, and according to Susan, who called me afterward, it turned into a screaming match between residents who blamed Patricia and residents who blamed me. Half the people think the board is being ridiculous, Susan told me. But Patricia has convinced the others that you're trying to extort the HOA by refusing to hire a proper snow removal company. I offered to hire someone if they'd cover the cost. She didn't mention that part. The standoff continued through 2 more storms. The parking lot became unusable, buried under nearly 2 feet of packed snow and ice. Residents started parking on the street, which annoyed the city and resulted in parking tickets. Several people stopped paying their HOA dues in protest. The whole community was fracturing over a stupid parking policy. I wasn't enjoying this. Despite what Patricia thought, I didn't want residents suffering. But I also wasn't going to let the HOA push me around or force me to operate at a loss. The lease paid me $1,200 a month, and if I had to hire professional snow removal for each storm at $500 a pop, I'd be losing money by winter's end. In mid-January, things escalated further. I received a formal lease termination notice from the HOA's attorney, stating that I'd failed to maintain the property per our agreement, and they were exercising their right to end the lease. The termination would be effective in 30 days. I took the letter to Mike. He read it carefully and shook his head. They're on shaky ground. You attempted to maintain the property and they physically prevented you. That's going to be hard for them to defend. So what happens? In 30 days, they stop paying rent and presumably stop using your lot. You can sue them for breach of contract and you'd probably win, but litigation takes time and money. Can I kick them out before 30 days? Not really. The lease allows for termination with 30 days notice from either party, so they're technically following the terms. I drove to the lot that afternoon and stared at the frozen mess. Without the HOA lease, I'd have an empty parking lot generating no income. I could try to lease it to someone else, but finding tenants in Burlington for a parking lot in the middle of winter would be nearly impossible. I'd probably have to wait until spring, and even then, who knew if I'd find anyone willing to pay what the HOA had been paying. Then again, if the HOA stopped using the lot, they'd have 30 residents with nowhere to park. Their own complex only had enough spaces for 1 vehicle per unit, and most households had 2. They'd been relying on my lot for overflow parking since before I was born. I started making calls to some of my contractor friends who worked in property management. After a few conversations, I learned something interesting. Finding parking in Burlington during winter was nearly impossible. All the city lots were full, private lots were expensive and had wait lists, and street parking was a nightmare with snow emergency routes and resident permit requirements. The HOA was about to learn a very expensive lesson about leverage. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just waited. The 30-day notice period ticked by, and I continued getting angry calls from residents who thought I was being petty. I explained to each one that I'd tried to maintain the lot, shown up multiple times to plow it, and been physically blocked by their HOA. Most seemed surprised by this information, which told me Patricia wasn't being honest about what was happening. On day 28, Susan called me. "Franklin, you need to know something. Patricia got a quote from a parking lot management company. They want $45,000 to lease a comparable lot for the year, plus a $10,000 security deposit." I whistled. "That's more than 3 times what you're paying me." "Exactly. And there are only 2 available lots even close to our area. The board voted last night and it's split 4-3. Patricia's side won, but barely. We're really going through with ending your lease." "What do the residents think?" "Most don't know yet. Patricia's been keeping this quiet. She told everyone we'd have a new parking arrangement in place before the lease ends. At $45,000 a year. She hasn't shared that detail." "Franklin, I know this is probably not what you want to hear, but is there any way to fix this? A lot of us just want our parking back." "I've always been willing to maintain the lot, Susan. Your president is the one who made that impossible." "I know. I voted against terminating the lease, but Patricia's convinced everyone you're the problem." 2 days later, the lease officially ended. I received a certified letter confirming the termination and a final payment for the last partial month. That same day, I drove to the lot and changed the locks on the chain posts. If they weren't leasing the property anymore, they had no right to use it. The reaction was swift and furious. Within hours, residents found their usual spots blocked off. I put up signs that said "Private property, no parking, violators will be towed" at both entrances. My phone exploded with calls, but I didn't answer any from numbers I recognized as HOA members. Patricia showed up at my house that evening. I watched through the window as she marched up to my door and pounded on it hard enough to rattle the frame. I opened it but didn't invite her in. "Can I help you? You can't lock residents out of that parking lot. They have rights." "They had rights when you had a lease. You terminated the lease. Now it's private property with no public access. We paid through the end of the month. And the month ended yesterday. Check your calendar." Patricia's hands were shaking, whether from cold or anger, I couldn't tell. "You're doing this to punish us." "I'm doing this because I own a parking lot that's no longer under lease. What did you think would happen? That I'd just let everyone keep parking there for free? We need time to make other arrangements. You had 30 days. That was the notice period you invoked when you terminated the lease. But we haven't secured the other lot yet. There's paperwork, deposits, insurance requirements." I felt a small twinge of sympathy but pushed it down. "That sounds like poor planning on your part. You knew when the lease was ending. We need at least another 2 weeks. Then you should have thought of that before you sent the termination notice. You can't end a lease and then demand extra time to move out. I'll pay you for 2 more weeks. The rate is now $3,000 per week." Patricia's eyes bulged. "That's extortion. That's a short-term premium rate for an otherwise unleased property. Take it or leave it. We'll sue you for this. You already threatened that. Let me know when you actually file something. Now get off my property." I closed the door in her face. The next morning I found my truck tires slashed, all 4 of them, clean cuts that left the rubber peeling and useless. I filed a police report, though I had no proof who'd done it. The officer who took the report raised his eyebrows when I explained the HOA situation. "Yeah, we've been getting calls about parking disputes at that Pine Ridge complex. Sounds like a mess. It's about to get messier, I said. I had the tires replaced and sent Patricia's HOA an invoice for $1,200, citing destruction of property. I knew they wouldn't pay it, but I wanted documentation of everything that was happening. The HOA held another emergency meeting, and this time several residents confronted Patricia directly. Susan recorded parts of it on her phone and sent me clips. People were furious about the parking situation and even angrier when they learned how much the new lot would cost. "You told us you had this handled," one man shouted. "You said Ellis was the problem, but it sounds like you created this whole mess." "I was enforcing our community standards," Patricia said defensively. "Community standards. Half of us can't get to work because we have nowhere to park. My wife got 3 parking tickets this week from street parking. That's $270 in fines because of your standards." Another woman stood up. "I want to vote to reinstate the old lease. This is ridiculous." "That's not possible," Patricia said. "Ellis has shown himself to be unreliable and hostile to our community. He showed up to plow the lot multiple times and you blocked him out," Susan interjected. "I was here. I saw the chain. You created this problem, Patricia." The meeting dissolved into chaos, with board members yelling over each other and residents demanding answers. Patricia tried to maintain control but lost the room completely. By the end of the night, 2 board members had resigned, and there was a petition circulating to hold a vote of no confidence in Patricia's leadership. I learned all this through Susan, who'd become my unexpected ally inside the HOA. "You should see the community Facebook group," she told me. "People are tearing Patricia apart. Half the comments are demanding she resign. What's she saying? That you're manipulating everyone and this is all part of your plan to raise the lease price. She's trying to paint you as the villain, but most people aren't buying it anymore. Does anyone want to actually negotiate a new lease? Some of us do. But Patricia won't hear it. She's dug in on the position that you're the enemy and we need to find alternative parking." 3 days later, the alternative parking fell through. The company that had quoted $45,000 a year backed out when they learned about the HOA's legal disputes. Apparently, they didn't want to get caught in the middle of a messy situation. Patricia scrambled to find other options, but by now it was late January, and available parking in Burlington was basically non-existent. Residents were desperate. Several approached me individually, asking if they could pay me directly to use the lot. I considered it, but ultimately said no. This needs to be resolved with the HOA as a whole. I'm not going to nickel and dime individual spaces while your board pretends everything's fine. A man named Richard who lived in one of the end units came to my house with a 6-pack of beer and an apologetic expression. "Look, most of us had no idea what Patricia was doing. We thought you'd stopped plowing the lot to be difficult. She never mentioned that she'd physically locked you out. She told everyone I was violating parking policies. Yeah, with your commercial truck." Which sounded reasonable until someone pointed out that you're the property owner, not a resident. "The rules don't apply to you." That's what I kept saying. Richard sighed. "Some of us are organizing to remove Patricia from the board, but that takes time and in the meantime, we're all suffering." Is there any way to work this out? I thought about it. These people weren't my enemies. They were just homeowners who'd gotten caught in Patricia's power trip. But I also wasn't going to let myself get walked over. "Here's my offer," I said. "New lease, 12 months, $1,400 a month." That's $200 more than before, which accounts for the hassle and covers inflation. I maintain the lot including snow removal with whatever equipment I deem appropriate. No HOA parking policies apply to maintenance operations. And I want a clause that says any interference with my property maintenance is grounds for immediate lease termination with no refund of that month's rent. That's fair. More than fair, honestly. I also want a written apology from the HOA board, acknowledging that they improperly terminated the previous lease and that I fulfilled all my obligations. Richard winced. Patricia will never agree to that. Then you need a new board president. Because I'm not doing business with someone who's already shown she'll lie and sabotage me to save face. Over the next week, the situation inside Pine Ridge HOA reached a breaking point. Patricia refused to negotiate with me, insisting that accepting my terms would be surrendering to extortion. But with no alternative parking available and residents increasingly angry, her support evaporated. A special election was called. Patricia lost her position as president by a vote of 18-4. Susan was elected as the new president, along with 2 new board members who'd campaigned on resolving the parking crisis. Susan called me the day after the election. "We'd like to accept your terms for a new lease. Can we meet this week to finalize the paperwork?" "What about Patricia?" "She's still on the board as a regular member, but she no longer has any decision-making authority. The new board has full authority to negotiate leases. And the apology? I'll write it myself. Patricia opposed it, but she was outvoted. You'll have it in writing before we sign anything." We met at a coffee shop in downtown Burlington to go over the new lease. Mike joined me to review the language, and Susan brought another board member named David for their side. The negotiation was surprisingly smooth. They accepted all my terms without pushback, and we agreed to start the new lease on February 1st. "I'm really sorry about all of this," Susan said as we finished. "Most of us had no idea what was really happening. Patricia controlled the information flow, and we trusted her." Lesson learned, I hope. Definitely. We're implementing new transparency rules for the board. No more closed-door decisions about major community issues. The written apology arrived 2 days later. It was diplomatic, but clear, acknowledging that the previous board had improperly interpreted the lease terms and created unnecessary conflict through their parking policies. It stated that I had consistently attempted to fulfill maintenance obligations, and that the lease termination had been premature and unjustified. Patricia's name wasn't on it, but Susan, David, and the other new board member had all signed. I accepted it and signed the new lease. On February 1st, I showed up at 6 in the morning after a fresh snowfall and cleared the lot with my plow truck. Several residents were already up, watching from their windows, and I got a few waves and thumbs up. It felt good to have things back to normal. Patricia, predictably, wasn't done. She filed a formal complaint with the HOA against me for intimidation and extortion, claiming I'd manipulated the board election and forced the community into an unfavorable lease. The new board heard her complaint at their next meeting and dismissed it unanimously. Susan told me Patricia had spent 20 minutes ranting about conspiracies and corrupt deals before storming out of the meeting. "Is she going to be a problem going forward?" I asked. "I don't think so. She's lost all credibility. Most residents won't even make eye contact with her anymore. I think she'll probably move out by summer, honestly. This whole thing embarrassed her badly. But Patricia had one more card to play, and it was worse than I expected. In late February, I got a call from a city inspector saying there'd been a complaint about my parking lot. Apparently, someone had reported that it wasn't properly permitted for commercial use and that I was operating an illegal business. "It's not a commercial lot," I explained. "It's a private lot that I lease to a residential HOA. You collect money for the lease." "Yes, but that's just rental income from my property. That's not a commercial operation. We'll need to investigate. Someone also reported that you're running a snow removal business from the lot, storing equipment there and operating without proper permits. I felt my blood pressure spike. Who filed this complaint? I can't tell you that. It's anonymous. But I knew. Only one person would be petty enough to try getting the city involved in our dispute. The investigation took 3 weeks and was incredibly disruptive. Inspectors came out multiple times, reviewed property records, interviewed me and my neighbors, and examined the lease agreement. In the end, they determined that everything was legal and above board. I owned the property, paid taxes on it, and had every right to lease it. My snow removal work on my own property didn't constitute a commercial operation, and since I wasn't storing equipment there long-term, there were no zoning violations. But the investigation cost me time, stress, and $1,000 in legal fees when I had to hire Mike to help me navigate the city bureaucracy. I was furious, and I was certain Patricia was behind it. I couldn't prove it, though. The complaint had been anonymous, and the city wouldn't reveal the source. I vented to Susan about it, and she sighed heavily. I can't say for sure it was her, but Patricia's been making comments at board meetings about how you're probably breaking all sorts of laws. She's obsessed with taking you down, Franklin. It's honestly scary how fixated she is. What can I do about it? I don't know, but be careful. She's not stable right now. The next incident confirmed just how unstable Patricia had become. In early March, I arrived at the lot one morning to do some routine maintenance and found graffiti spray painted across the pavement. Large red letters spelled out "Ellis is a crook and extortionist" across multiple parking spaces. I took photos and called the police. The same officer who'd handled my slashed tires report came out and shook his head. "You're having a rough year. It's one person behind all of this. The HOA lady, Patricia Morton, but I can't prove it. Any cameras on the property? Not yet. I'm installing them next week." That had been planned anyway, but now it felt urgent. The officer took a report and told me he'd drive by the area more frequently, but without evidence, there wasn't much he could do. I spent the afternoon pressure washing the graffiti off the pavement, which cost me half a day's work and another $100 in cleaning supplies. Susan called me that evening. "Franklin, I heard about the graffiti. I'm so sorry. Did Patricia say anything about it?" She actually seemed pleased when it came up at tonight's board meeting. She made some comment about karma. It was disgusting. "I'm installing security cameras this week. If she tries anything else, I'll have proof." Good. And for what it's worth, the board is discussing whether to remove her entirely. We might have grounds to vote her off for creating a hostile environment and damaging community relations. The cameras went up 3 days later. I installed 4 high-quality units with night vision and motion sensors, positioned to cover the entire lot and both entrances. I also put up signs warning that the property was under video surveillance. I didn't have to wait long to get my proof. 5 days after the cameras went live, I got a motion alert at 2 in the morning. I pulled up the app on my phone and watched in real time as Patricia walked into the lot carrying a bag. She looked around nervously, clearly checking for witnesses, then pulled out a bottle and started pouring liquid across several parking spaces. I called 911 immediately. "Someone's vandalizing my property right now. I have them on camera." The dispatcher took my information and sent a patrol car. I pulled on clothes and drove to the lot, arriving just as the police did. Patricia was still there, trying to spread what I now realized was motor oil across the pavement to make it slippery and dangerous. The officer approached her with his flashlight raised. "Madam, I need you to step away from there and put down whatever you're holding." Patricia froze, the oil bottle still in her hand. In the harsh LED light, she looked wild and desperate, her hair disheveled and her eyes wide. "I'm not doing anything wrong. This is HOA property." "No, madam, it's not. This is private property owned by Mr. Ellis, and you're trespassing and vandalizing. He's a criminal. He's been extorting our community for months. Someone has to stop him." "Madam, put the bottle down now." Patricia threw the bottle at the officer. It missed and splashed oil across his pants. That was the last straw. The officer called for backup, and within minutes, Patricia was in handcuffs, crying and screaming about injustice and corruption. I showed the responding officers my security footage, which clearly showed Patricia entering the property, pouring the oil and throwing the bottle. They arrested her for trespassing, vandalism, assault on an officer, and creating a public hazard. "That oil on the parking spaces could have caused serious accidents," one officer told me. "If someone had slipped and crashed, she could have been facing much worse charges." I gave a full statement and provided copies of the footage. The officers told me I'd need to come to the station the next day to file a formal complaint, and that the district attorney would likely want to talk to me about pressing charges. When I got home at 4 in the morning, I felt exhausted and sad. I'd never wanted any of this. I just wanted to lease a parking lot and make a modest income from property my uncle had left me. Instead, I'd been pulled into months of conflict, harassment, and now criminal activity. The story hit the local news 2 days later. HOA president arrested for vandalism in parking dispute. Read the headline. And the article detailed the whole messy saga. My phone exploded with calls from reporters, lawyers offering their services, and even a few people who'd had their own HOA nightmares and wanted to share solidarity. Susan called to apologize for the 100th time. The board voted unanimously to remove Patricia. She's no longer part of the HOA in any capacity. We're also considering banning her from attending meetings even as a resident. How are the other residents reacting? Most are horrified. A few of Patricia's close friends are defending her, saying you drove her to this, but they are in the minority. Honestly, I think several people are going to sell their units and move. This whole thing has destroyed the community atmosphere. Patricia's legal troubles mounted quickly. The assault on an officer charge was particularly serious, and the district attorney decided to prosecute fully. I had to testify at a preliminary hearing, where Patricia's lawyer tried to paint me as the aggressor who'd pushed his client to a mental breaking point through months of harassment. Mike, who attended the hearing with me, actually laughed at that argument. "Your client initiated every single conflict," he told the defense attorney. "Mr. Ellis has documentation of that. He's the victim here, not the aggressor." The judge agreed. Patricia was bound over for trial on all charges. In April, Patricia's lawyer approached me about a settlement. She wanted to plead to reduce charges in exchange for restitution and an agreement not to file a civil lawsuit against her. "How much restitution?" I asked Mike. "They're offering $5,000 to cover your damages, legal fees, and the harassment you've endured. And if I say no, then it goes to trial. She'll probably be convicted on most of the charges and face jail time plus restitution that the court determines. But it'll drag out for months and require you to keep dealing with this." I thought about it. The money wasn't really the point. I wanted this finished so I could move on with my life. "I'll accept the settlement if she also agrees to a restraining order and a written confession of everything she did. I want documentation that clears my name completely." Patricia agreed. In May, we met at the courthouse with our lawyers and finalized the agreement. Patricia looked like she'd aged a decade. She avoided eye contact as she signed the papers acknowledging that she'd vandalized my property, filed false complaints against me, and engaged in a campaign of harassment. She agreed to a 3-year restraining order prohibiting her from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. The judge accepted the plea deal. Patricia was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and ordered to pay me $5,000 in restitution. If she violated the terms, she'd face the original charges and likely jail time. "Do you have anything you'd like to say to Mr. Ellis?" the judge asked her. Patricia's lawyer whispered something to her. She cleared her throat, still not looking at me. "I'm sorry for my actions. I let my emotions get the better of me and I was wrong." It was the most insincere apology I'd ever heard, but it was on the record, and that was what mattered. After the hearing, Mike and I grabbed lunch at a diner downtown. "That's finally over," he said. "You handled it well. I just wanted to plow snow and collect rent." Welcome to property ownership. It's never simple. The parking lot situation stabilized over the summer. The HOA paid their lease on time every month, residents parked without incident, and I maintained the property without interference. Susan turned out to be an excellent president, and under her leadership, the community started to heal. Patricia moved out in July. I heard through Susan that she'd sold her townhouse at a loss and relocated to somewhere in New Hampshire. Good riddance. In August, I used part of the settlement money to repave the section of the lot that had been stained by the oil. I also added better lighting and reinforced the fence around the perimeter. The lot looked better than it had in years, and several residents commented on the improvements. One evening, Richard stopped by while I was inspecting the new pavement. "Hey, Franklin, place looks great. Thanks. Figured it was time to invest in it properly. I wanted to thank you for how you handled everything. You could have really screwed us over when the lease ended, but you didn't. You were fair, even when we didn't deserve it. You weren't the problem. One person was. Still, a lot of landlords would have jacked up the price way higher or refused to work with us at all. You're a good guy." It was nice to hear, and it reminded me why I'd stuck with this despite all the headaches. My uncle had maintained this relationship with Pine Ridge for 15 years because he believed in being a fair landlord and supporting the community. I wanted to honor that. As fall arrived and the first hints of winter appeared, I prepped my plow truck for another season. This time, there were no angry letters, no chains blocking the entrance, no one questioning my right to maintain my own property. When the first snow fell in late October, I cleared the lot at dawn and drove away without incident. It was, in a word, boring. And after the year I'd had, boring was absolutely perfect. The HOA and I developed a solid working relationship. Susan and the board proved to be reasonable people who understood that cooperation worked better than conflict. They even asked if I'd be willing to handle some additional maintenance tasks like spring sweeping and parking space repainting, which I agreed to for a small additional fee. By December, almost a full year after the initial conflict started, I sat in my truck at the edge of the lot after clearing a fresh snowfall. The sun was rising over Burlington, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Residents were starting their days, warming up cars and scraping ice, going about their normal routines. This was what my uncle had built. A simple, mutually beneficial arrangement that served the community and provided steady income. Patricia's ego and power trip had nearly destroyed it, but in the end, common sense had prevailed. I drove home thinking about lessons learned. I'd learned to document everything, to install security cameras before problems started rather than after, to stand firm on reasonable boundaries, and to recognize when someone's behavior had crossed from difficult into dangerous. I'd also learned that most people, when given the choice between conflict and cooperation, will choose cooperation. It was just the Patricias of the world, the ones who valued control over community and pride over pragmatism, who made everything harder than it needed to be. The parking lot continued generating steady income. The HOA renewed the lease when the first year ended, and we negotiated a modest increase tied to inflation. My business thrived, partly because the local news coverage of the dispute had actually brought me new clients who appreciated how I'd handled the situation. I even got a call from another HOA across town that was having disputes with their parking lot owner. They wanted to know if I'd consider leasing them space. I toured their property, listened to their situation, and ended up buying a second lot from a retiring owner. That lease started the following spring. As for Patricia, I heard through the grapevine that she tried to join the HOA board in her new community in New Hampshire, but was rejected when they learned about her record. Karma had a way of catching up. On a cold January evening, almost exactly a year after Patricia's arrest, Susan invited me to attend an HOA meeting. I wasn't required to be there, but she said they wanted to acknowledge something. I showed up curious and was surprised when the whole room applauded as I walked in. Susan stood at the front with a plaque. "Franklin Ellis," she said formally, "on behalf of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association, we want to recognize you for your patience, professionalism, and commitment to our community during a very difficult period. You had every reason to walk away from us, but instead you worked with us to find solutions. This plaque is a small token of our appreciation." The plaque read, "Presented to Franklin Ellis, property owner and partner, for outstanding service to Pine Ridge community." I accepted it, feeling genuinely touched. "Thank you. I'm glad we got through that mess together." After the meeting, several residents came up to chat and thank me personally. It was a nice moment, a real closing of that chapter. Driving home that night with the plaque on my passenger seat, I thought about how strange life could be. A year ago, I'd been ready to give up on the whole arrangement, to sell the lot and wash my hands of HOA drama forever. Now I had 2 lots, a thriving business, and a genuine sense of community with the Pine Ridge residents. My uncle would have been proud, I thought. He'd always said that property ownership was about more than just collecting rent. It was about relationships, reliability, and serving the people who depended on you. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, but I'd learned it well. The parking lot saga became something of a local legend in Burlington property management circles. Other landlords and HOA boards reached out to ask about my experience, and I found myself becoming an unlikely expert on navigating landlord-tenant relationships with homeowner associations. I even gave a talk at a property management conference in Montpelier about the importance of clear contracts, documentation, and knowing when to stand firm versus when to compromise. The room was packed, and afterward, several people told me they'd been through similar situations. HOAs attract a certain type of person, one property manager told me. People who crave control and authority but often lack the judgment to use it wisely. You got unlucky with Patricia, but you handled it perfectly. As winter turned to spring and then summer, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The parking lot required minimal drama and generated reliable income. My construction business stayed busy. I even started dating a teacher named Teresa Baker who thought the whole parking lot story was hilarious. "You got into a war with a homeowners association over a snow plow," she said, laughing over dinner one night. "That might be the most Vermont thing I've ever heard." "It was stupid," I admitted. "But sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even over stupid things. I'm glad you did. That Patricia woman sounds awful. 2 years after the initial conflict, I was plowing the Pine Ridge lot after a particularly heavy snowstorm when I noticed someone watching from one of the townhouse windows. It was an elderly man I'd seen around but never spoken to. He waved, and I waved back. Later, he approached me as I was finishing up. "You're Franklin, right? Robert's nephew." "That's right. I'm George. I've been living here since these units were built. I knew your uncle well. He was a good man. Thank you. I wanted to apologize." During all that nonsense with Patricia, I didn't speak up. I should have. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I didn't want to get involved. I'm sorry for that. It worked out okay in the end. Maybe, but it shouldn't have taken vandalism and arrests to get there. Some of us should have stood up to her sooner. He paused, looking out at the clear lot. "Your uncle always said the secret to a good business relationship was trust and fairness. He lived by that, and it looks like you do too." That conversation stayed with me. George was right that more people could have spoken up sooner, but I also understood why they hadn't. Standing up to someone like Patricia took courage, especially when she controlled the HOA board and could make residents' lives difficult. The fact that the community had eventually found that courage and removed her from power was what mattered. Democracy, even in something as small as a homeowners association, required people to get involved and hold their leaders accountable. As I drove away from the lot that day, my truck loaded with snow and my fingers cold despite heavy gloves, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd won some petty conflict, but because I'd proven that standing up for yourself and doing the right thing could actually work out. It would have been easy to cave to Patricia's demands, to buy a different truck, or hire expensive contractors, or just walk away from the whole situation. But doing any of those things would have set a precedent that aggressive, unreasonable people could bully others into compliance. By holding firm, documenting everything, and letting Patricia's own behavior expose her, I'd protected not just myself, but potentially others who might have faced similar treatment. The story eventually faded from local news and became just another chapter in my life. The parking lot kept generating income, the HOA kept paying on time, and winters came and went without drama. 3 years after everything ended, Susan stepped down as HOA president to focus on her growing family. The new president, a friendly accountant named Marcus, continued the cooperative relationship we'd established. The community had learned from the Patricia disaster and implemented better checks and balances to prevent any one person from wielding too much power. I still own both parking lots. I still plow them myself with my commercial truck, the same F-250 that started the whole mess. No one has complained about it in years. Sometimes I drive past Patricia's old townhouse and wonder if she ever thinks about what she threw away. She'd had a nice home, a leadership position in her community, and neighbors who mostly got along. All of that had been destroyed because she couldn't accept that her authority had limits. But mostly, I don't think about her at all anymore. She's gone, the drama is over, and life has moved forward. The parking lot sits there under sun and snow, a simple patch of pavement that somehow became the center of a months-long battle. It's just a parking lot again now, serving its purpose without fanfare or conflict, and that's exactly how it should be.